right, hi everyone. Today we're picking up where we left off in our last video. We're going to complete the second meditation and get into the third meditation in Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. So, at the start of the second meditation, Descartes hits upon his Archimedean point, his foundational truth, right? Having doubted the existence of everything, everything that could be doubted, he finally hits upon this truth that can't be doubted, right? Which is the cogito ergo sum, the I think therefore I am. I think therefore I am is the first indubitable truth that Descartes finds, right? And all the rest of his knowledge has to be built on this point. So the next thing he sets out to do in the second meditation is to try and find any other certain ideas he has. Right? And the second half of the second meditation is about bodies, right? And about why he will persist in doubting the existence of bodies. So on page 30 in the universal pagination, he writes, "Let us consider the things which people commonly think they understand most distinctly of all. That is, that is, the bodies we touch and see. I do not mean bodies in general, for general perceptions are apt to be somewhat more confused, but one particular body." So, as I set out looking for the next idea that is indubitable or certain, my obvious choice would be to turn to bodies, right? To physical bodies, to my perceptions when I see an individual body, right? This book, any individual. And the problem, or what Descartes wants now to demonstrate, is in some more detail why those bodies should remain doubtful to us, why the physical world should remain doubtful, right? He gave us some cursory reasons to doubt the physical world. Our senses deceive us sometimes. Therefore, it would be better always to assume that our senses are deceiving us. But now that he has hit on the cogito, right? He's certain of his existence. This makes him more sure of his perception, right? Because remember, perception is an act of thought. I'm a thinking thing, and one of the acts of thinking is perception. So we perceive things, right? We perceive things. We have perceptions. I can be certain that I am having perceptions, right? Now, whether or not those perceptions are in fact true representations of the external world is still in doubt. So, yes, I'm having perceptions, but what is the value of those perceptions? Do those perceptions, in fact, give me information about real bodies in the external world, or are those perceptions like the perceptions of dreams, right, which are false, which don't correspond to anything that is actually happening in the physical world? So, in order to think about what we perceive when we perceive, and what kinds of perception might be trustworthy, Descartes sets out to examine one of these individual bodies. And he chooses a piece of wax. He says, let us take, for example, this piece of wax. Now, this is an incredibly important section of the text. And I was just doing a little additional reading in this. I recommend, if you're interested in knowing more about Descartes and um, more of the sort of details of this argument, of all of these arguments, I encourage you to read the Objections and Replies to the Meditations in the Cottingham edition that I have here. They're included. They're included in most versions. But I was reading about these, and Descartes was extremely interested in optics and in the way that the eye sees the world. In other words, in sort of the mechanics of perception. And so what we get in Descartes, in this analysis of what we perceive in an individual body, is a very interesting transition from sort of traditional metaphysics, Aristotelian metaphysics, to a more scientifically grounded kind of metaphysics. And what Descartes is investigating here ultimately is the question of substance. Now, substance is an idea from Aristotelian metaphysics, from traditional metaphysics. And the idea is that every individual object has some essential substance, right? Something that underlies all of that thing's properties. And so if we think about any object, take this book, right? We recognize that the book has certain attributes. What we perceive of the book are primarily these attributes, right? I see that it has a dark blue color, right? It is a rectangle. When I rap on it, it makes a sound. When I touch it, I feel, the roughness of the paper. Now, all of these things, all of these attributes of the book are the way I perceive the book, right? It's through those perceptions that I apprehend the existence of the book. However, right, all of those attributes are changeable, right? So when I move the book further into the sunlight, that dark blue becomes a very light blue, almost a white. When I move the angle of the book, it's no longer a rectangle, but a very different shape of rectangle, right? Whether I'm looking at it lengthwise or flat, or held up or flat. So what Aristotle takes as the foundation of metaphysics is this nature of attributes, right? The fact that the qualities of an object are changeable. So we think about an individual human being, for example, right? The human being begins as a baby, right? A very small baby. And it grows into a full-grown adult, right? It changes its size. And as it changes its size, it will change its attributes, right? Its face will change, in addition to its body changing. It will grow all kinds of hair, and then in some cases it will lose a lot of its hair. We can think of this sort of more mysteriously, maybe, when we think about the fact that the human being, over the course of its life, will not retain any um, part from birth till death. Right? There is not a single cell in your body that was there when you were born. Now, what all this sort of um, provokes is a question of the true identity of an individual. Right? If all of the attributes of a thing change over time, what is it that really makes the thing that it is? In the case of the human being, right? What is it that makes you the individual being that you are? In the case of the book, right, what is it that makes it that individual thing if all of those attributes that allow me to perceive it are constantly changing? Now, for Aristotle, the answer is substance. There is some underlying substance in which all of these attributes inhere. So, in the case of the human being, for Aristotle, all of our physical attributes will change. It will be impossible to define the being of a human being based on any particular physical characteristic or quality. Rather, all of those changing attributes are only sort of inessential qualities that inhere in an essential substance. And the substance of the thing is that which remains the same through all of those changes. In the case of the human, Aristotle says the substance of the human is the soul. The soul is that which remains the same, which remains constant through all of the changes that the body undergoes. And right, the same basic principle is at play for any object. Right? There will be some substance even to this book that will underlie all of the possible changes and make all of those changes possible while remaining the same. Right? How can something remain the same while changing? That is a fundamental metaphysical question, right? And the answer is substance, right? Substance is that which remains the same while attributes of that substance change. All right, so we have this idea of substance in metaphysics. And for Aristotle, substance is like soul. It is the ultimately, it is going to be the purpose of a thing. Right? It is the essential function of a thing that gives it its substance, that makes it what it is. Now, Descartes is going to challenge this Aristotelian concept of substance, of what makes a body, an individual, because he's going to challenge this assumption about what truly underlies all of those changing attributes. And so that's what we get in this example of the wax. What we find in Descartes' discussion of the wax here is that the idea of substance becomes much more mysterious. What we end up with at the end is much more like the modern concept of matter and materiality than an Aristotelian concept of substance as a sort of purposive being. Now, that is not doing full credit to Aristotle, but we'll have to put that on the back burner for now. So Descartes writes, right? Let us take, for example, this piece of wax. It has just been taken from the honeycomb. It has not quite yet lost the taste of honey. It retains some of the scent of the flowers from which it was gathered. Its color, shape, and size are plain to see. It is hard, cold, and can be handled without difficulty. If you rap it with your knuckle, it makes a sound. In short, it has everything which appears necessary to enable a body to be known as distinctly as possible. Right? Okay, so uh, what is the wax? How do we know the wax? By its attributes, right? Uh, it has the taste of honey. It retains the scent of flowers. It has a certain color, shape, and size. It is hard and cold to the touch, right? It makes a certain sound when you rap it, when you knock on it. This is what makes us understand its bodily nature. We know it as a body through these attributes which we perceive. He goes on, but even as I speak, I put the wax by the fire, and look, the residual taste is eliminated, the smell goes away, the color changes, the shape is lost, the size increases, it becomes liquid and hot. You can hardly touch it, and if you strike it, it no longer makes a sound. But does the same wax remain? Right? So this is the question. What is it that remains through these changes? All of these physical attributes are transformed. So what is it that we call the wax? Right? We knew the nature of the wax through certain attributes. But all of those attributes can change. The wax can lose everything that we said made us know it was wax, and it will still remain the same wax somehow. So what is it that allows us to say that the solid wax and the melted wax are the same wax? Right? What is the continuity? Does the same wax remain? It must be admitted that it does. No one denies it. No one thinks otherwise. So what was it in the wax that I understood with such distinctness? Evidently, none of the features which I arrived at by means of the senses. For whatever came under taste, smell, sight, touch, or hearing has now altered, yet the wax remains. And so, what is this thing? What gives corporeal nature? What gives a body its individuality? At the end, on page 31, right, he goes on, I must therefore admit that the nature of this piece of wax is in no way revealed by my imagination, but is perceived by the mind alone. The individuality of the wax is not perceived through the senses. What allows us to see the individuality of the wax through the changes that its attributes undergo is the mind alone. Right? The mind perceives the bodily nature of the wax through or despite its attributes. Right? Not through sensory perception, but through its own kind of intellectual act. Right? Descartes says this is an act of purely mental scrutiny. Right? It is a logical, excuse me, a logical apprehension. Right? It is, in short, an act of judgment. We say that we see the wax itself if it is there before us, not that we judge it to be there from its color or shape. And this might lead me to conclude without more ado that knowledge of the wax comes from what the eyes see and not from the scrutiny of the mind alone. But then if I look out the window and see men crossing the square, as I just happen to have done, I normally say that I see men themselves, just as I say that I see the wax. Yet do I see any more than hats and coats which could conceal automatons? I judge that that they are men. And so something which I thought I was seeing with my eyes is in fact grasped solely by the faculty of judgment which is in my mind. Right? So what happens, Descartes says, is not that I see a body, but that I see a collection of attributes and qualities, and that from out of those qualities, I make a purely mental deduction, or a purely intellectual judgment, in order to grasp that those qualities inhere in something that is individual and permanent and remains the same through changes. But so we don't know what this is. Right? What is this thing? I judge that it is an individual, but I don't know what that individuality consists in. I have a kind of intellectual sight of that individuality, but I don't know what it is. And this is why, for example, Plato, another ancient metaphysician, would argue that substance, that wasn't his word, but would argue that that which remains the same through changing appearances, changing attributes, is nothing but an idea, right? That it is an idea, which is the essence and true being of a thing. Right? For Plato, ideas are more real than appearances. Ideas are more real than the physical world for precisely this reason, right? It is a pure act of the mind that allows us to grasp this identity, this substance, sameness, which remains through the changes of the physical world. So, what is the ultimate upshot of this? That the truth of the world, insofar as truth requires individuality, and the being of the world, that is to say, the sense in which things are, rather than the sense in which things become, the sense in which things remain the same despite their changing appearances. That all of this is purely intellectual and not about perception or physicality. So we can already see beginning to develop one of the central dilemmas of modern philosophy that begins with Descartes, which is the mind-body problem, right? For Descartes, the mind and the body are fundamentally separated. And what connects them is mysterious. And we see this in this meditation on substance, right? That the corporeal, physical nature of things is separate from the intellectual substance or essence that remains the same through those changes, right? And more pointedly, in the separation between my mind and my body, right? I've proved that my mind exists. I've proved that I'm a thinking thing. I have yet to prove that I am a physical, corporeal thing. So we leave this off for now, right? This difficulty about substance. We'll come back to this in the fourth meditation. We move on then to the third meditation, right? Having landed in this difficulty about having any knowledge of the external world, right? Because although I recognize that I have perceptions, I can't know what the actual being of those things that I think I perceive is. I don't know about the reality of those things. I don't know if those perceptions are real. So, the third meditation will be dedicated to proving the existence of the external world. As of yet, the only thing Descartes knows exists is his own mind, his own thinking. So, he writes on page 35, "Now I will cast around more carefully to see whether there may be other things within me which I have not yet noticed. And I am certain that I am a thinking thing. Do I not therefore also know what is required for my being certain about anything?" Okay, so he's thinking about how to prove the existence of the external world. Right? And he's casting about within himself to see if there's anything else in his mind that might help him discover the indubitable existence of anything outside of himself. And this is an important moment. Do I not therefore also know what is required for my being certain about anything? Right? I've hit on a truth. I think therefore I am. And in discovering that truth, not only have I learned that something is true, right? That a certain proposition is true. I think therefore I am. But I've also discovered what you might call the experience of truth. What truth looks like, feels like, the criterion for truth. And so this is useful, right? Because I can now measure any other idea I have against this certain truth. And if any other idea has the same sort of quality, then I might be able to say that that is also a truth. So he says, in this first item of knowledge, there is simply a clear and distinct perception of what I am asserting. This would not be enough to make me certain of the truth of the matter if it could ever turn out something which I perceive with such clarity and distinctness was false. So now I seem to be able to lay it down as a general rule that whatever I perceive very clearly and distinctly is true. And so this is sort of famously problematic definition of truth in Descartes. But this will be his these will be his criteria for truth, right? What is it that defines the cogito? I think therefore I am. The clarity and distinctness with which I perceive its truth. So anything that I perceive clearly and distinctly is likely to be true. Right? Now, what will that clarity and distinctness consist in? Right? It can't simply be the clarity and distinctness of a perception in itself. Right? For example, I perceive clearly and distinctly the color red in this carpet I'm looking at. Right? But that perception of redness, well, perhaps I can say, yes, the color red exists. I perceive it clearly and distinctly. But I don't perceive clearly and distinctly that red that I'm perceiving is evidence of an external world. It's possible that I'm inventing this color that I'm looking at, that it is a product of my mind, just as in dreams. So perception on its own is not clear and distinct knowledge of an external world. It's clear and distinct knowledge of a perceived experience, not knowledge. So, because perceptions themselves are not what is being questioned here, ultimately, Descartes is looking for clarity and distinctness in judgments, right? Again, the judgment that the perception represents an external reality, right? That the red really belongs to the rug, that the perception of red proves the existence of the rug, right? That is the judgment. And I don't clearly and distinctly perceive, or I don't clearly and distinctly understand the judgment that my perception of redness leads to the existence of the thing I perceive. So how can I have certainty in my judgments? I'll have to have a clear and distinct understanding of that intellectual sight, right, which allows me to perceive the thing in itself, that which undergoes changes, that which remains the same. So, in order to make our judgments clearer to ourselves, in order to begin to try to have clarity and distinctness about judgments, we have to understand several different kinds of ideas. Because some ideas are going to be obviously imaginary, right? Products of my mind, like a unicorn. I can close my eyes and perceive a unicorn in the same way I can close my eyes and perceive this red carpet. But the unicorn is absolutely an invention of my mind. Whereas my perception of the carpet could be an invention of my mind, or it might be a representation of a thing that actually exists in the external world. So, on page 38, Descartes writes, "Among my ideas, some appear to be innate, some to be adventitious, and others to have been invented by me." Now, this is an extremely important distinction. Right? Some of my ideas appear to be innate, meaning inborn, a priori. Right? It seems that some ideas I am born with. I don't get from the external world, but I have always already in my mind. Some ideas are adventitious, meaning derived from experience, what we would call empirical, right? And some are invented. Okay, so some ideas appear to be innate. part of my mind, right? Implanted in my mind, as it were. Some appear to be adventitious or empirical, and some appear invented. Now, this sort of matrix of thought, the idea that some thoughts might be innate, or the question of whether or not a thought is innate, adventitious or empirical, or invented or imaginary, is going to be absolutely essential for the rest of modern philosophy. So, this will lead to the debate between rationalists, who will argue roughly that, or in some cases, that all ideas are innate, and empiricists, who will argue that all ideas come from experience, from our senses. Descartes is going to say we have a little bit of everything. Right? We have some innate ideas, some adventitious ideas, and some invented ideas. Now, the difference between an innate idea and an adventitious idea for Descartes is going to be whether or not I understand that idea according to either what he calls the natural light, or according to a spontaneous impulse. My adventitious ideas I'm going to have based on a spontaneous impulse. That is to say, I say the carpet is red. Right? That is an idea about the carpet. I can make that proposition about the carpet. The carpet is red. Now, my idea that the carpet is red is, according to Descartes, a spontaneous impulse. Why? Because I look at the carpet, or rather, I look in the direction of the thing I call a carpet, and I'm struck by a perception of redness. And thus, I am spontaneously led to say that the carpet is red. But when I more closely examine things, I see that at night, the carpet is not red, but black. Right? I see that when the light hits it at different angles, the shade of red changes. I see that I can close my eyes and feel the carpet, and the carpet will exist without its redness. Now, all that doesn't necessarily challenge the existence of the carpet, but it makes my proposition that I spontaneously blurt out, the carpet is red, less certain. Right? It illustrates that that proposition, the carpet is red, is not one that I grasp through the natural light, but is instead only a spontaneous impulse. And so on. Again, on 38, Descartes writes, "When I say nature taught me to think this, all I mean is that a spontaneous impulse leads me to believe it, not that its truth had been revealed to me by some natural light." Right? So this is this distinction, right? The natural light reveals things that are indubitable and certain, right? I, for example, can grasp that 2 + 2 = 4 by the natural light. I can grasp that the angles of any right triangle will add up to 180 degrees. Right? by the natural light. The natural light illustrates the absolute certainty of a judgment, right? The natural light reveals the clarity and distinctness of judgments uh, as, you might say, a spontaneous impulse validates the reality of a perception. So, um, and again, remember, judgment is the important point. Now, my ideas are innate, adventitious, or invented. My ideas either represent some reality and are based on a clear and distinct judgment, or they are spontaneous and dubious and need to be submitted to further investigation and logic. Thus far, all of my ideas about the external world seem to be spontaneous. Are there any ideas I have in my mind that are going to have the same kind of clarity by the natural light that my own existence does? On page 40, Descartes continues. It now occurs to me that there is another way of investigating whether some of the things of which I possess ideas exist outside me. Insofar as the ideas are considered simply as modes of thought, there is no recognizable inequality among them. They all appear to come from within me in the same fashion. But insofar as different ideas are considered as images which represent different things, it is clear that they differ widely. Undoubtedly, the ideas which represent substances to me amount to something more and, so to speak, contain within themselves more objective reality than the ideas which merely represent modes or accidents. Again, the idea that gives me my understanding of a supreme God, eternal, infinite, immutable, omniscient, omnipotent, and the creator of all things that exist apart from him, certainly has in it more objective reality than the ideas that represent finite substances. So, the important idea here is objective reality. And there's a good footnote in my edition here about objective reality that I'll read. Objective reality, i.e., participate by representation in a higher degree of being or perfection. According to the scholastic distinction invoked in the paragraphs that follow, the formal reality of anything is its own intrinsic reality, while the objective reality of an idea is a function of its representational content. So, right, formal reality, or actual reality, is the reality of a thing in itself as it exists independently of me, right? Not what I perceive of it, but what it is in itself, independent of my perception, right? The reality of the carpet, the reality of the book, the reality of the human being, not as it's perceived, but as it exists in itself. And then there is objective reality, which is the reality of an idea of an existing independent thing. So, when I say, uh, for example, uh, the carpet is, I'm speaking of the objective, oof, the formal, actual reality of the carpet. The carpet exists. It is. It has some being. It is actual. Uh, when I say the carpet is red, I'm speaking of the objective reality. That is to say, the way I represent the carpet to myself in my mind. I perceive the carpet as red. Thus, when I objectify it in my mind, when I represent it to myself, it is red. However, the objective reality of my representation of the carpet can be more or less in correspondence with the actual reality of the thing. And if I say the carpet is red, that is based on the objective reality of my idea of the carpet. However, that proposition, carpet is red, its objective reality may be less than other representations of the carpet. For example, if I were to say the carpet is made of atoms, the representation, the carpet is made of atoms, has more objective reality than the representation, the carpet is red. Because that representation, the carpet is made of atoms, is going to more faithfully and accurately express the actual being of the carpet than the expression, the carpet is red. And so the objective reality of a representation is based on how adequately that representation corresponds to the actual reality of the independent thing. And so, okay, hopefully that makes some sense. Now we're talking about the idea of God. And he goes on, it is manifest by the natural light that there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in the effect of that cause. It is manifest by the natural light that there must be at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in the effect. For where, I ask, could the effect get its reality from, if not from the cause? And how could the cause give it to the effect unless it possessed it? It follows from this both that something cannot arise from nothing, and also that what is more perfect, that is, contains in itself more reality, cannot arise from what is less perfect. So, if I have an idea, that idea, if it has objective reality, that is to say, the objective reality of an idea, has to come from the thing that caused that idea. The extent to which the representation of the carpet as red has objective reality is the extent to which the carpet itself is actually red. The extent to which the representation the carpet is made of atoms has objective reality, is the extent to which the carpet actually has atoms. That is to say, what gives objective reality to a representation is the actuality of the thing that is represented in the mind. More generally, all Descartes is saying is, in order for something to have power, that power can only come from something equally or more powerful. Everything that exists has a cause, right? You exist because your parents copulated and got pregnant and had you. The book exists because somebody published it, right? The phone exists because somebody manufactured it. The plant exists because the seed was germinated and watered. Everything has a cause. And everything, therefore, can be understood as an effect. And an effect can't have more power or reality than its cause. Something can't come from nothing, right? This is the basic principle here. It is impossible for nothing to be the cause of something. And the logical extension of this, something perfect, according to Descartes, can't be caused by something imperfect, because something perfect would have to be, right, for something perfect to be caused by something imperfect would mean that the imperfect creates something from nothing in order to create this more complete and more perfect thing from itself. So God can give birth to a human being, but a human being can't give birth to a God. God can create a human being can't create a God. You can't create something more powerful than yourself. Right? And a writer can't write a character who is smarter than themselves. Now, the next move here is to return to this idea of God and the objective reality of this idea. I have the idea of God. And the idea of God is one of perfection. Because the idea of God is an idea of perfection, Descartes says, that idea can't have been caused by myself. Why? Because I am imperfect. How do I know that I'm imperfect? Well, for one thing, because I've been deceived my whole life, right? Because I'm full of doubts, because I've been wrong about so many things, it would be absurd to say that I'm perfect, because I know that I've been misled and deceived and held false ideas. I know that I'm limited. I know that I am lacking things, above all knowledge. So I'm not perfect. And yet, I have in my mind an idea of perfection. Where could such an idea come from? Right? In order for there to be an objective reality or a representation of something, that representation has to be based on something actual, must be caused by something actual. Right? I have a real idea, and it is an idea of perfection. Why do I have that idea? It must have come from something. And, as we just saw, it must have come from something perfect. Because, even in the case of ideas, the effect can't be greater than the cause. So if I have an idea of perfection, it must have been caused by something perfect. Now, because I am not perfect, there must be some other being, some perfect being, which is the cause of this idea of perfection. What could this perfect being be? It would have to be God. So, because I have an idea of perfection, because I know that I am not perfect, I have to, Descartes thinks, assume the existence of a perfect being from which the idea of perfection is drawn, or who put this idea of perfection in me. So this is the proof of God's existence. Right? All right, so we'll pause here, and then we'll come back in a moment and go over some of the more of the consequences of this.